Correct.
Is it Colonel Leslie?
No, I was a flying officer,
Flying
which is
Officer
a
Leslie.
lieutenant, is the equivalent.
Lieutenant Leslie flew the Halifaxes in Europe in 1944. Stuart, tell us a little bit about you and yourself and how you got involved with APs, please.
Well, I joined the Canadian Air Force at 18 years of age, trained in Canada. Went overseas as soon as I graduated in early May of 1943, and with further training in England, I was on the squadron in February of '44, and it was the 7th mission that I was on the night of the 1st of May in 1944, when we were shot down by a German night fighter. The upward firing guns were almost certain was the method that they got underneath us. And
ME-210, is that it?
or even Ju-88s. They had a lot of them doing that mission as well. And the last I remember was getting out of the seat. I'd given the bailout order because we were on fire from Wimkick to Wimtick almost, and the hatch was open because I could see the navigator and the bomb aimer and the engineer down there, and I got out of the seat, was going to start to go down into the thing, and that's the last thing I remember until I came to free falling in the air. Actually, I pulled the ripcord just immediately, and I was only in the parachute a very, very short time. Of course, this was at night, black and what have you, and I just sensed that the ground was coming, and it sure did. It was quite a contact. I remember in training they said that we never had a jump before or anything much about it, but they said, oh, it's about like jumping off a 12-foot wall. Well, I think this might have been 24 feet. And I was stunned, I think, and the aircraft crashed, or parts of the aircraft not very far from where I was. And of course, the intelligence briefings that we'd had, they always said to get away from the burning wreckage as quickly as you could, which I did, hoping that the other guys would have, landed as well. But after walking for 3 nights on my own and not making any contact, I eventually had to have help. And the first farmer I went to, he was alone, so I approached him and talking my boys' high school French, but they were Flemish, and they speak Flemish or Dutch. But anyway, he had enough French that, so they gave me help, and I received a lot of help from them. They got people that could speak English. I was billeted in a chateau, and the 2 girls that came from the chateau to get me were, they just did everything in the world. And so the last 3 nights were compensated for by food, bath, shave, and wash, and sleep, really good sleep. And I spent time in this small village in Flanders. Kerkhoven was the name of it. And then they contacted Brussels and the underground, and they thought it would be much safer if I came to Brussels, because being billeted in a small village, they thought the people would be on to me, and it could happen that I would be discovered. But really, in an afterthought, if I had stayed in the village, I would have probably been liberated sooner. And but anyway, the decision was to go to Brussels, so I rode a bicycle with an escort about nearly 90 kilometers to Brussels on cobblestone roads, and I hadn't ridden a bicycle for a while, so it was a little bit of an ordeal. But trouble started once I got to Brussels. I was left high and dry in a safe house. The Gestapo had raided and taken a number of the people that knew where I was. But they eventually solved the problems, and I got into another rescue organization and was moved eventually from Brussels east into the Namur area, where I linked up with two Americans. John Bradley and Royce McGilvery were their names, and they'd both been shot down considerably longer time than I had in Northern Holland. Had come down the chain through the safe houses and organizations in Holland and ended up in Belgium. And we were assembled at this chateau south of Namur. And then an RAF fellow joined us. And off we went on this old transport truck, burning wood, you know, that's one of those type of thing. And we were destined to the Ardennes, well, they call it mountainous, but the hilly part of eastern Belgium. And as we drove into this little village by the name of Spontaan, here was a German Wehrmacht roadblock, and in the subsequent investigation and searching and everything, they discovered Bradley and McGilvery, and I couldn't carry on much in the language or anything else, so I was apprehended too, and the four of us were. And this Spontaan is not very far from Bastogne, where the Battle of the Bulge was fought in the winter of 44, 45. So we were in the bag in a German Wehrmacht prison in Namur. After 2 days there, the Luftwaffe appeared on the scene and claimed us and took us to a flying station at Ever, put us in the guardhouse there, then transferred us downtown Brussels to a much bigger Luftwaffe facility. And from there, the Gestapo got in the act, and they took us over from the Luftwaffe. Now, the Luftwaffe were the service that was to be responsible for fellows shot down. And but anyway, the Gestapo took over, transferred us out of this place into Prison Saint-Gilles in Brussels, and started their interrogations and this type of thing. And Bradley and I, well, none of us would cooperate other than the number, rank, and name. And for our non-cooperation, we ended up in dark cells for considerable length of time and brought out, and because we wouldn't talk again, back into the cells. And this went on until September of 44. And then after the breakout of the Allies from the Normandy area, the British Second Army made a run up towards Brussels, and there was no real defense of Brussels. There was a lot of demolition of stores and things like that, but there was no real battle. But the Gestapo evacuated this total, the prison inmates of Saint-Gilles prison, and put us on this prison train trying to get us into Germany. There was about 50 of us airmen that were in various cells in the prison, and we were all assembled in one car, and the civilians were treated much worse than we were. They were packed into these cars, and we were on that train for 3.5 days before we there's actually a production out now in which John Bradley and I appear, and it's called The Nazi Ghost Train, and it plays on the History Channel in the United States. And anyway, with all the circumstances, we made an escape from this train, and we dispersed, and the fellows all got back on various routes to Britain or back to America. And I wanted to go back to my squadron when I got to London, but they said, no, we'll send you home, and you can convert and change for the Pacific operation.
Missed a part here, Stuart. The British 8th Army came in and freed you up?
That's right. Well, they liberated Brussels.
Yeah.
By this time, we were on our own. McGilvery and I stuck together, and as we exited the marching yards where the train that had been transporting us was, well, it was somewhat abandoned, really, by the guards, and the main reason we didn't get out of Belgium was because of the Belgium railway workers and or other people. They didn't want this train load of civilian people to go into Germany, which is what the Gestapo's intention was. So as Royce and I got away from the train, we stuck together, and then that next morning, when we were in the Brussels industrial area, in came the British Second Army, and it was a liberation and an event like I've never seen in my life before or never will again. The people of Brussels just opened their arms, and the flags appeared. All kinds of things went on. Of course, the British Buffs Regiment was the first tank regiment that I saw. They didn't want to have anything to do with us. They were pushing on after the Germans and things like that. So Royce says, hey, there's a chicken colonel over there in a Jeep with a British major was with him and a driver. So we got over to them, and this colonel said, look, go to the Metropole Hotel. That will be the headquarters, and that's where there'll be somebody to deal with you fellows. So that's where we went. They put us up in the hotel. We were there for another 3 or 4 days. And in my case, the British, well, McGilvery stayed with me too. And we went to Lille in northern France, which was British Second Army headquarters by truck. We were there a couple of days, and then they trucked us to Paris and put us in hotels again that they'd taken the use of. And then in my case, they flew me back from Paris to Hendon Aerodrome in northern London. And McGilvery went with the Americans. And I didn't ever remember exactly how they repatriated him back to, he was from the 8th Air Force, Ian Bradley as well. And then I received my kit in London and had some leave, went back to the squadron, visited friends, and then they shipped me back to Canada. Right. And in preparation for what was going to go on in the Pacific, and I started on the training program for it, but eventually in August of '45, everything came to a halt. So I joined the Royal Air Force's Escaping Society very early. My mother noticed a piece in the paper about it. So I rode off and sent a little bit of money to London, England, and sure enough, the Escaping Society, the RAF, was formed in 1945 in Paris. A great number of, there was their first enrollment, I think, was over 900, but the British Royal Air Force's Escaping Society have closed up now. They put their standard in the cathedral at Lincoln. But in '64, we formed a Canadian branch of the Royal Air Force's Escaping Society. And it wasn't too long after that when the AFIs, hearing of it and what have you, and they've always been very close to the Canadian branch of the Escaping Society. And it was a natural that we were invited to their reunions, and many of them have attended the Canadian reunions over the years. And I have, whenever I've been able to do, I have come to the AFI's reunions, which they hold in many places in the United States. And when it was Wichita Falls this year, I thought, I'm going to get down there. Fortunately, I have a niece who lives in Oklahoma City. So she drove me down here this morning, and here I am registered for the reunion and reacquainting myself with, I hope, a good number of the people.
You bet, Stuart.
Yeah.
Question, do you remember the names of any of your helpers?
Yes, most of them are dead now. Marcel de Klerk in the small village of Kirkove. All right, Marcel was his brother. Maurice was the one that first helped me, and they were identical twins. They passed me on to the Van Wassenhove, Alice and Elizabeth Van Wassenhove, and it was through them that I was transported or rode the bicycle to Brussels. And then I got into these troubles by being abandoned somewhat due to the Gestapo activity. The next people that took over were Guy and Louise Scoop, and they billeted me, and Lissermeyer was another home that I stayed in Brussels before I moved east to Namur, and the chateau was, oh my gosh, my old senior's memory is but they were, anyway, Bradley and McGilvery and myself and Brooks was the RAF fellow, were billeted in this I just said the name, the large house anyway, and then we left from there to go to this to the Maquis camp in eastern Belgium and in the Ardennes, and that was where we ran afoul of the German authorities and ended up back in the prison in Brussels.
Were any of these helpers taken by the Germans and brutalized?
There were people that were captured the night that I was left high and dry. Some of those, I didn't know the names because I just sort of arrived on the scene.
But you mean you were in the attic and everybody else left?
Well, they took me to a safe house. The first night I was in Brussels, I spent it in this very nice apartment with a lady that could speak English. In fact, I think she was of English and had married a Belgian after the First World War. Then I was met the next morning with an escort and taken to a cafe in the Ukela area of Brussels. And I thought, gee, this is a great place, I'm going to be here. About 8:30 that evening, this young lady arrived, and there was conversation with the pub keeper and what have you, and she came to me and she said, quickly, we must come. We've had a little bit of an alert, and we're going to take you to a safe house for the night. Well, the safe house turned out that it was an elderly couple that had offered their property, and sure enough, and she said, I'll be back in the morning. Well, she didn't arrive back in the morning. That whole cell of the organization was evidently taken by the Gestapo that night, and it was days before somebody else realized where I was, because the elderly couple that granted me the asylum overnight, they weren't active members of the organization. They were just they were offering their home. And that's where, but eventually, as I say, the wheels got back together again, and I was able to be taken back in and then moved to the east and things like that. So.
Now, there is a Belgian lady here with us, Aphys now. Her mother was English and married a Belgian man, Anne Brusselmans.
That's right. I've met Anne Brusselmans over the years, and she did know of me in the organization, or brought into Brussels. I never had any direct contact with Anne Brusselmans during the war, but she, and probably very rightly so, that she did know my name, that I had been in the organization in the Brussels area, and things had happened to which they also do to other people. And
a lot of us here in Aphys just love Anne Brusselmans and her daughter Yvonne.
Daughter Yvonne, yes. I've met them both, and They certainly were in the area where I was now, but as I say, I never remember meeting them or anything in that time, but they were certainly involved.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Stuart, Leslie, thank you so much for your great interview.
Thank you,
Royal
Davey.
Escaping Society or Royal Canadian Escaping Society.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome.
We're speaking now with Odell Hooper. He was 20 years old when he was a top turret gunner in a B-24 flying over Europe. Odell, tell us about you and how you got involved with AFIS.
Well, I had read about it someplace, I don't remember just where, and I got in contact with David Schoss, I believe. And he sent me the papers to fill out, and that's when I joined. That's been, I don't know, probably 15 years ago.
That's good, but that's not what I want to hear. I want to hear about the time that you were in a B-24.
Oh!
And what caused you to leave that B-24?
Well, we had bombed, it was March 8th of 1944, and we had bombed Berlin that day. And on the way back, we had 2 engines shot out, and we were losing altitude in formation. I kept thinking, we were going to make it, because I was up in the top turret looking around. I knew that we were shot up pretty bad with 2 engines out, and I could look out from my position on the right wing, and I could see a big hole in the right wing, and the gasoline was coming out and going down the side of the plane, and it was even taking some of the olive drab paint off the side of the plane. But we were still flying. Even though we'd lost altitude, we were still flying. I thought we were going to make it back to England, and I felt my feet getting cold. I looked down between my legs, and I could see the crew bailing out. So that's when I started unhooking everything to get out of that turret. And training, supposedly the radio operator that sits at his desk right below the top turret was supposed to reach up there and pull a release seat where I would fall out. My intercom had been shot out, and I didn't hear the bailout signal. So when I saw what was going on, I knew pretty well it was time to start looking for a parachute. And sure enough, the time I got out, there was 1 parachute left over in the corner. And I grabbed that thing, buckled it on, and the co-pilot was on the catwalk ready to jump. And he was real surprised when he saw me coming down there, because he thought everyone was gone. The pilot was still up at the controls. And when he came down, or when I came down and he saw me, well, we shook hands, and he jumped. Well, there I was, by myself back there, and never jumped out of a plane before. Had no idea what country we were in, or whether it was over water or land or forest or whatever. And I must have ridden that plane 100 miles, it seemed like it, before I could get up enough nerve to jump out. There was no one there to push me. But anyway, I finally got up the nerve and jumped out. And we had been told in training, if you ever had to bail out, to put your arm up across your face so that the shroud lines wouldn't slap you in the face. Well, I remembered that. And I had my arm up there, and I was pulling on that, what I thought was the D-ring, and nothing happened. And I thought, well, I guess I've got a parachute that's not going to work. But anyway, I looked down, and what had happened, I had buckled that parachute on wrong. I'd buckled it on with that little canvas carrying strap over here on the right side, and the D-ring was over on the left side. Well, when I saw that, man, I jerked that D-ring out. About that time, those cords slapped me in the face. It was a pretty good feeling, though,
Yeah.
because it did blossom out, and I finally floated down to the ground. But really and truly, I didn't think I'd ever, I don't know how high up we were, but probably 12,000 feet, something like that. But I didn't think I was going to ever come down. I thought I was just going to float around up there forever. And then all at once I looked down, and here was the ground just rushing up at me 90 miles an hour. And I hit, and I didn't hit very good because that parachute, I guess, me having it on backwards, I hit real hard and caused me to hurt my back. But anyway, I gathered that parachute up and found a ditch that had a bunch of weeds overlapping. And I crawled down in that ditch and pulled that parachute and wrapped up in it because it was cold. See, in the plane we had those heated flying suits, but when I disconnected everything, well, all I had was just regular clothes, and it was real cold. But anyway, I stayed in that ditch the rest of the day. This was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I stayed in that ditch until dark because I knew that, I felt like the Germans would be looking for me. See, Holland had been occupied since 40, I believe. So anyway, I got up out of that ditch and looked around. I found a haystack. And I crawled into that haystack and dug me a hole and crawled into that haystack and spent the rest of the night. And then the next day, I saw a Dutch farmer out there in the field. Well, I knew I had to have some help because, I had no idea where I was or not even what country I was in. So I went out there to him, and I was just lucky enough that he didn't like the Germans, and he was willing to hide me and help me. He could tell who I was from my uniform. We couldn't speak because he couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak his language. But anyway, he took me to his barn and hid me up in the loft and covered me up with straw. And he went and got a younger man that came and could speak a little English. And he told me to go with him. There was a forest nearby. He said, the Germans are looking for me. He said, go with me and you stay hid out in this forest till after dark. And when someone comes by whistling, God Save the King, then you come out. So that's the way I got in with the underground. That night, when that guy came by whistling God Save the King, I went out, and from there on I was with about 22 different families that helped me try to get to a neutral country. And I got all the way across Holland and then to Antwerp, Belgium. That's where I was captured by the Gestapo. They had gotten into the line, and they caught me there. And then from there I went to prison in Brussels for a few days. Then I went to a tent POW camp in Frankfurt, Germany for a few days. And then I went from there to a camp in Poland. And I was there until, I believe this was August when I went to that camp, and I was there until February of '45. And the Russians overran that camp, and they transferred us to, they evacuated the entire camp. A lot of them had to walk out. Now this was in February of '45, one of the coldest winters they'd ever had. But I had almost died with diphtheria there in camp. So I went out on boxcars. The sick and wounded went out on boxcars. And we were on those boxcars 8 days and nights, and there was 52 of us in each boxcar. And I went to a camp near Barth, Germany, which was Stalag 1. It was an officers' camp. But all the rest of people that wasn't sick or wounded, they had to march out. And they marched from February until the war ended, really. So I was very fortunate that I did have diphtheria and got to go out on that train. But then after that, when the war ended in May, we got up one morning and the Russians had left the camp because the Germans had left the camp because the Russians were coming in from the east and the Allies were coming in from the west, and they knew that it was just a short time until the war would end. So they just up and left. But we were there in that camp probably for a couple of weeks before they could come in and fly us out.
Did you have anything to eat in Stalag 1 while you're...
Oh, if it hadn't have been for the Red Cross, we would really have been in a lot of trouble because the Germans I don't guess they had much to feed us because they sure didn't, they didn't feed us very well.
Well, I can understand that. You know, they were in a foreign country and they're getting their tails whipped and they needed to get out.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you weren't very important anymore.
That's right. That's right. They were ready to
Well,
go
Odell,
back.
that's quite a story. Anything else you wanted to think about?
Oh, it was quite a deal, and some of it I can remember just like it was yesterday, even though it's been, let's see, 44, 59, 58 or 59 years ago. But some of it's still pretty plain.
Another little thing I would always want to know, we'll just take a few seconds here, is when you're firing the top turret of a B-24, there were two 50 caliber machine guns?
Right.
What was it like? Is it really noisy or was it...
Oh yeah. We see those planes, they weren't. They didn't have oxygen. We had to wear oxygen mask all the time, and it was just real noisy.
Mm-hmm.
And not only the sound of the guns, but the engines, the motors.
Yeah. What mission were you on when you got shot?
Number 3.
Number 3.
Yeah. Long mission. It lasted 15 months.
You got to shoot at some airplanes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it
Well,
was.
thanks again, Odell. I do
Well,
appreciate you coming in and talking to
Well,
us.
appreciate you having had me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're speaking now with O.B. Streeper from Chinoy, Illinois. Age 19, he was a ball turret gunner on a B-24. This B-24, now point where you were.
Right up under here.
Down there, my goodness. That was sort of tough, and you were flying along on your 23rd sortie, and what happened?
Well, we was coming in over the coast down south of Nice and to bomb an air drone. And flak come up. We didn't get too excited about it, but it must have been radar kind of. They shot 5 of us down, bam, 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 just like that. And we're the only ones that got anybody out of an aircraft. And we turned inland, and we started jumping over land. We was trailing fire for about, I don't know, probably 300 or 400 feet behind us. And we had one part of one stabilizer that was torn off, and so we headed in inland, and as soon as we got over land, started jumping, and ended up landing in the Alps Maritime Base Alps up by Eagles Peak. And I was hitting the hip, and a piece of flak come in along the side of my leg. Didn't hurt it much, but the one in the flak come up, she embedded in there. And you'll never feel as lonesome in your life to be 19 years old, wounded, in a strange country, can't speak the language. You're hanging there and you're looking down, you can see blood on on your boot. That I'm going to bleed to death.
Yeah.
Then after I lit, I seen some of the other guys. None of us was in proximate. Kind of as I came down, I caught an air drift, I guess, come up and dropped over the other side of the mountain. That's the only thing that saved me, because the rest of them got PIC and PW right off the bat. And
Well, you weren't picked up right away.
no, I spent 87 days, 7 hours and 35 minutes behind enemy lines.
Well, did they finally get you?
Nope.
You just evaded all the way.
I'm done evading all the way. I got very active with a Maquis band down in out of Lamas, France. Edward Pomean, he was ahead of it, and I wandered around for 3 days, and then I decided I got to give up. I got the flak in me, and then boy, I shot all my morphine I had and everything, and taking those pyrobenzodrine tablets out of the escape kits. And I finally coming into this little village, and I ain't done anything. If all the stories they tell me at the pre-planning of what happens when you get shot down. And some old woman, and we had a little girl with her, and she grabbed me and she pushed me back in some undergrowth and brush, and whack, 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 whack. And I couldn't understand her, but I was so goofed up then with morphine, pyrobenzodrine, and so to make the long story a little shorter, I just laid there. She went on. Probably 5 minutes later, a German patrol come by, and what she knew the German patrol was coming, and she pushed me back in the brush. Well, after they went by, I kept laying there, couldn't get up, screwed up, and I would not be able to say if it was an hour or half an hour or 2 hours, but two young French girls come out, and they come up right to where I was at, and they put their arms down to get me up, and I got up, and they put my arms around their neck and drug me back into town. And they took me up into this old house, and I do mean it was old, in a village. There was one story here and a story here and a story. Anyway, they got me up in there, and they'd look at my hip, and they screwed around, and a guy come in, and he looked at it, and then he left. Well, that turned out to be Pommier, and they decided they were going to cut the flak out. And when you don't speak the language, you know, you get a little spooky. Yeah. And so he had a hunting knife and a straight razor, and he done some work on me, and I was holding a .45 automatic on him, kind of, you know, this is going to be done my way. Anyway, I had out of my pack up here on, you know, your harness, first aid kit. It had a some sulfur diazine, I believe they called it, and I had a packet of that, and I tried to get them to put it in. They guess they put it in, and then they sutured me up a fishing string, and they kept me around there for several hours. And they'd come and look at you, and they'd leave. Somebody's going to speak English. They'd say, hello, hello, and that was about it. And so they took me back out the edge of town, put me in the same place. Later that night, a German motorcycle came down, had a sidecar with a machine gun on it, and the guy stopped us right there where I'm at. I said, hold Streeper, this is the time I guess we're going to meet our makers. And I was getting ready to pull down when Pommier come running out, and he says, no, 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 no. And what it was a Frenchman on a stolen German motorcycle. They put me in the sidecar, and they took me down, how far, I'll never tell you. I always say it was 40 miles, but they got me out of the immediate area. It was crawling with Germans. And then that was where I got tied up with the underground band real close. and they got me some civilian clothes. I had a pair of black knickerbockers, gray knickerbockers, and a black shirt, and a dark blue suit coat. And that's what they got me dressed up first in. And I had an Alpine bag, and I put my jacket in it. Christ, you know, all the Air Force boys, you couldn't give up your leather jacket. That was disgrace. And on the back of mine I had miscarriage and 252399, and then Staff Sergeant O.B. Streeper. So I carried it on. I figured, well, that'll be good. I got parachute, and they packed it in this Alpine bag, and that was all I owned in this world. I had those Poor Silk Escape maps. I had a .45 Colt automatic. I had a .357 Smith Magnum like Patton carried, identical. I want to see that gun of Patton so bad.
Turtle handle.
Right, mine didn't. Mine had wood handles on it. But a friend of my dad's, who was an FBI agent, got it for me. And I want to know what the serial number of his so I can compare it with mine. But they're right out of the same time when the .357 was first made. Anyway, from then on, then tried to make it in northern France. He tried to take me up there, and didn't work out too good. I followed a knapsack, and I got some people that spoke good English, and they told me that you will follow the knapsack. You will not contact the person that's got it. Stay well behind it, but don't lose it. And when they set that down, you stop short of it, and there can be somebody else that'll pick it up and walk off with it. You follow that knapsack. And so that's exactly how I traveled.
And jumped from a knapsack too. Did you walk till you traveled, or?
Walked. I rode a train. I rode a train a short distance. They got the ticket for me. I'd already had papers. I had Swiss papers. I was supposed to have been a Swiss. And I had Swiss papers. And when the person I was following, he got the ticket, he come by and give me a ticket. So I followed him and got on. And when they look at your papers, they said one word, that was it. That was going to be all over. Well, at that time, it wasn't too bad. I was in civilian clothes. I was armed. I had never had dog tags with me. And I was never really too smart a boy. I can tell you that much. And then things got bad. We worked our way back down in southern Italy, and French come up with ideas that's going to take me down through Italy and back into the base, and they even had me out rowing around in a bay one night in some kind of a fishing boat. Was going to put me on a submarine. They got a huge imagination, I'm going to tell you. And I was laying there in the front end covered up with a bunch of old tarps and stinking rotten fish and stuff in there. And I'm a praying that submarine never shows up. It didn't either, thank God. But a lot of things, they would come up with some fantastic ideas. And you want to know the unique part of this thing?
Yes, sir.
If you will get a hold of me after my daughter gets here, she's flying in Friday night. I'll show you a book that shows all this.
Did you write a book?
No, sir. I got a photographic book, and I will show you what my airplane looked like 10 days after it crashed on the mountainside.
Okay.
And I'll show you in civilian clothes with the French underground.
Okay.
And because it's too easy for people to say, oh yeah, I was shot down, or I done this and I done it. Hell, they weren't even in the war. And so I love it. I love it. I love the service, not for an occupation. I was very, very, very young tool and die maker, and I quit school when I was first of the sophomore year, and I could have kept out of the Army. I didn't want out of the Army. I wanted in it. I wanted in the Rangers. I ended up in the Air Force. And when I ended up in the Air Force, they wanted gunners and flight engineers and armors. And I didn't have no fear of flying or anything. That wasn't it. But I wanted in the Rangers. Well, I never got into Rangers, thank God, because I wouldn't be here talking to you today.
Yeah, right.
And spent a lot of time, done a lot of strange stuff. I met up with some of our guys now and then split. And I never wanted to be around anybody too long. Didn't want to be. Pommier was the only one. I had a princess. She was American, and she was in White Russia, I guess it is. I got her name and address at home. And she gave a lot of money to keep me alive. But the rest of them, and then after we got into the bridge deal, they got very, very touchy to turn you in. There's too much money on your head, too much money. And they got my camera, they got my leather jacket with my name, rank, and serial number on it, and some Frenchmen put personal effects from the dead Germans in my bag. My bag's on that direction of the bridge, and I'm going across the bridge before it's detonated, and I'm going out down that way. Well, they heard German trucks coming, and they detonated the bridge prematurely, and here's my bag laying over there with the camera in it. And the camera had stuff in it that should not have been in it. So immediately that was put me into the spy class.
Yeah.
And they wanted me bad. And I was very fortunate to be in an area where it was strictly heavy mountains. And the Germans didn't want to come in there. My daughter goes over there every year and spends a couple of weeks with the granddaughter of Edward Pommier. And she pries out information out of people about this. And they'd come up to burn this town out on 3 different occasions. The town, La Sasa and La Mas, is on a mountainside, and that road is no wider than this room here. So it was very easy to blow it out or blow it above and drop it down on it. And the Germans didn't want to go in there. And there was a lot of Maquis back in there. Some of them call themselves Maquis, some of them call them FFI. There was fascists, communists, Bolsheviks, you name them. They were dropping supplies to them, so they were all friends.
Yeah.
And but they would turn you in. And several of our guys were taking PW. In fact, Benny Nord, I was with Benny, and I told him, he was up a little further north in France, and I told Benny, I said, let's get out of here. And he said, yeah, we'll leave tonight. And I said, I'm leaving now. He said, why? I said, it isn't right. And just why the hair on my back was standing up. And it just, something wasn't right. So I said, come on with me. And he said, no, I'm gonna stay. And he said, I'll meet up with you. So I blew out of there about 9 o'clock in the morning. And Benny was taking PW about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he spent the rest of the war in a PW camp. He's the only one alive out of the crew anymore. And then, I never bothered to tell people. They wouldn't have believed you anyway, you know what I mean? And a couple things you do, you kind of wonder, was it necessary? I seen a lot of things go on that I didn't approve of what the French underground had done. And there was a guy come down, and I talked to him. And he was from Paris. And he had a way to get me out, and he was going to come down and bring some new papers down to me. And they'd taken a photograph of me. They're going to give me new papers, and he would take me out. Well, Pommier found out, the rumor was that he was a German agent. And they didn't want to come in this area, and they figured if they could come in, get me outside of this area, then they could take me. And they wanted me bad. They wanted me bad. So as he came up, he knocked on this little door, and he caught a .357 right straight in the face.
Yeah, that's tough.
And
Well, their lives depend. They just weren't sure who it was, so they did away with him.
yep,
What is your opinion of the helpers?
helpers were wonderful. Now Pommier, not all. Pommier was fantastic. Pommier was fantastic. He laid his line. The people in this little town of Lamas, they were fantastic because they would hang bedding out of this one house. There was and I can show you pictures of it. I was back in an old, about, I'd say 3 miles. But if I'd come into that cabin, and then I would come up in the village sometime. But if the Germans were in the village or around there, they hung linen out, sheets and bedspreads and stuff out of the, so I could see them from there. And you stay out, you cut and go right back up over the mountain and keep on going. And these people laid their life down for me.
They did.
Yes, they did.
That's why I love them.
And like the ones that turned Benny in, they turned him, I understand, they turned him in for a loaf of bread. People are hungry. I just didn't trust them. The only ones I trusted was Pommier. And yeah, I would like to get with you just for our own conversation after my daughter gets here on Saturday or Sunday and show you pictures of these houses.
I'd like to see them too.
And they would have killed everybody. They went up so-called. I cannot verify it. Linda says the people of the village said they come up 3 times to burn the village out. Now going back to this Frenchman, he turned out to be a French hairdresser. And I never said nothing about it. I just, shooting a civilian, what are they going to do to you, you know, come on. And so Linda come back and she says, from France, probably 5 years or so ago, she said, what do you know about a French hairdresser? I said, what do you know about French hairdresser? She says, well, I heard somebody shot him and they drug him up and threw him up along the road about 3 miles from where they shot him. And I said, yeah. I said, that happened to him. And Pommier wanted to take him up and throw him up at this road. It was a main road. Because that told them, as far as they were concerned, don't come in here. Here's what's happening if you come in here. And they laid their life down. There is no question. They laid their life down for me. And I've got pictures of a hole in a wall. And these houses are built funny. There's a lot of voids in things. Well, the Germans come into town and they put me inside of a hole. They laid stones up. I understand they hung a tapestry or something like this down in front of it, and a shipper rope. I heard a lot of noise going on outside. And I could hear Germans coming and going about a few hours later. Now, when you're in total darkness, they give me a jug of wine, a jug of water, some cheese, and a big loaf of French bread. How long I was in there, I can never tell you for sure. But it was approximately a day and a half or 2 days. And they took it all out, and you imagine being in total darkness. You cannot tell up from down. The hole was about from here to that wall, and I could just stand up in it, and it was probably 5 feet wide. Now, the toilet facilities are not too great in there.
It didn't flush.
No, they did not flush. But you could stick your hand and say, oh, God. Because you couldn't figure right, left, up, or down. And the unique part, I pretty well got it all documented. Prickner got it all documented.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that.
And
Me, I appreciate all that you did for our country.
well, no, I done what I was supposed to do. I've been interviewed many times, and I say people don't owe me nothing because I done exactly what I was supposed to have done.
Well, I
And-
appreciate what you did.
And you take the, I've made the remark on several occasions, I'd like to see some of these damn 19-year-old kids today fall out of an airplane wounded nobody speaks your language. Just how well did they perform? And but we had so ungodly many of them. That's the reason I'm looking forward to this group. I'm looking group. Can everybody here has had the same thing. We always had a saying: it is no question of being shot down. It is a question of when and where. Well, why did it bother you? Well, 19 years old, didn't bother me a hell of a lot. I always did like a little adventure, and you didn't dwell on it. You know, I could look at you and, yeah, you know, we ain't gonna make it. No, you're probably gonna get killed, but not me.
Not me.
I'm gonna be there. And that's the way it ended up.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're speaking now with Bob Sweatt. He was a gunner on a B-24 in World War II at age what, Bob?
21.
21 years old, and you're from where now?
Lovington, New Mexico.
Great, that's a nice place. What happened at 21,000 feet and over what?
We were coming back from a raid on Ludwigshafen, and FW-190s hit us out of the sun, head on. They got 5 of us, went down just 15 minutes or less. We were the first one, we were leading the group, and they concentrated on us. I lost 11 men that day, or 10. I was the only one that survived.
Well, don't stop. What else happened?
Well, oh, it's a long story, but the thing blew up. I just got my parachute on. I just snapped my parachute on. I stumbled over to the waist window, and of course, all heck was taking place there. I mean, the right wing came off. I saw it out the waist window. The tip of the right wing and number 4 motor was burning. It's like it looked like a rag saturated in gasoline. And I got to the waist window, and the acceleration was building up so great until I bet I weighed 500 pounds. Then there was a terrific explosion. And when I came to, it was really odd. I thought I was blind. Of course, that scared me to death. My oxygen mask had been jerked across my eyes. And when I came, the first thing I reached up to get feel my eyes, when I jerked my oxygen mask off, and there I was. I don't know, I must have been around 17,000 feet then, I guess, and just a junkyard, the whole plane had deteriorated. And I looked up after I pulled my ripcord. I looked up and I could see the rest of the group going back to England, and boy, there I was sitting over somewhere, I didn't know where. And then, of course, I came on down and hit the ground, and of course, that long story there, but I got in with the French underground. And
wait a minute, for the long story, you were cutting the jugular vein, and you were bleeding pretty bad.
That's true. I had that, after I pulled my ripcord, I felt like, well, I really felt good because I had taken on the whole German army then. I felt so good, but I noticed I just bloody all over, and I could see over here I just bleeding, and the blood was squirting out of the side of my neck. And I reached up and I could feel a hole in there. So I just held it together until I got on the ground, and then I hid in a little shock of feed, and I took dirt and stuffed into the hole, mud, because it was, and I stuffed it into kind of stopped it.
Okay, you're on the ground, you got your parachute there, what are you gonna do next?
Well, when I hit the ground, I got loose my parachute, and I was going, our orders were to bury our chute. And I made one scratch with my hands on the ground. It was frozen. Every one of my fingernails just split right back. And so I just dropped it and took off.
Your left hand was injured, so
I did it with my right
from
hand.
digging to bury your parachute. So you put off your bloody clothes, and then what?
Well, the way I pulled my clothes off, I reached down. First, I took my chute off, and then I pulled my big heavy coat off. Then I reached down to get my boot. My left ankle was swollen so bad I couldn't unzip it, so I just ripped it off. And then I started running across this field, and I just slinging a May West this way and something else this way, and finally I hit in a shock of feed, and the Frenchmen came up and surrounded me, and I heard them talking, so I moved the bundle of feed over, and I could see them, and they pointed to it and says, "Anglais," and I said, "No, American." And one of them, I got out, and one of them jerked that scarf off around my neck. It was just soaking in blood, and kind of ironic, but my lip had been hit, I guess. I'd been hit, and I could see my lip was sticking out. I could see it. And he started spitting on his handkerchief and wiping the blood off my face. And another one produced a little old tam, another one gave me a shirt, another one gave me a pair of pants. And by that time, the Germans were everywhere. They were just already over there. And we started back across the field there. The plane is burning about a quarter of a mile from where we were. And this German started hollering at me, and I just kind of kicking claws. I didn't know what to do. And he saw my chute, and he turned, and this other old man that was with me and a little boy. And I noticed the French had been detailed, I guess, to pick up pieces of the B-24. So we passed by a big piece about the size of a door, and I just reached down and got one end of it, and the old man got the other, and we started up where all the Germans were surrounding the plane. It was burning. And we passed a little place about, maybe 70 feet long and 30 feet wide. It was just brush that they hadn't plowed in the field. And there was a little swale, a little dip there. And as we went down in this dip, I just dived into the briars. And I turned around and looked, and this little boy, he was 9 years old. I found out years later. And I saw him pick up the other end of the piece of tin, and they took off, and that's where I stayed the rest of the afternoon till they picked me up that night.
They picked you up at night?
The Frenchmen
picked you up?
Well, I got into this place, and I had to, it's just a real small place, as I said, kind of wooded place with briars. And I got into I dug out as best I could, and I threw leaves on me, kind of covered myself up with leaves, and they were frozen. I mean, the ground was frozen. And I stayed there all afternoon. And of course, I just kept praying for night to come. And it kept, and finally, sun went down, it began to get dark, and I thought I had it made, and crows started coming in. Just crows, and they'd light, and they'd see me, and they were ack-ack, ack-ack. I thought, my gosh, I've gone this far, and I'm going to get caught. And so finally, it got darker, and they left, and it still wasn't real dark. And I saw the old man that helped me. He was down off this little hill with a cart, and one horse and a cart. So I thought I'd just get up after it got kind of dark and go down there. Well, I couldn't. I couldn't get up. And that really, I began to get frightened then. So I started rolling over and over, and I must have rolled, I guess, for 100 yards. And I got down pretty close where he was, and he came over and helped me up and put me in this cart and took me to his house. And he told me years later, he said, the boy did, he said, Sweatt said, you set up on that cart, said, we passed Germans, they were just lined up on that road. He said, you sat up there like a wooden Indian.
What was the boy's name?
Maurice DuPont. He was about 19 years old, 18 or 19.
So he took you into town and hid you out?
Oh, no, they took me into the farmhouse.
The farmhouse?
His farmhouse. They were out in the country.
Tell us about that.
Oh, well, they took me into his farmhouse, and Mrs. DuPont, she got a rag, started washing my face and cleaning the wounds. I had bullet holes all in me. And she offered me something to eat, but I couldn't eat anything. And so I didn't know how to, of course, I didn't speak any French at all. So I told her, I motioned that I was sleeping. And so they took me to their house, and their barn is all together. So they took me through the place where the barn was, where they kept their cows, and upstairs. And I remember getting in bed, and that's about the last thing I remember for about 3 days. I'd wake up at night starving for water, and it'd bring me wine diluted with water, and I think I must have got drunk or I'd died. I don't know.
Well, Bob, come on. You're lying in bed in the French farmhouse. Are you not back to our lines yet?
Oh, I didn't get back to the lines. This is back in January of '44.
So you're being helped by the helpers and doing a great job putting their lives
Well,
on the line.
Oh, yeah. And then they took me to another place over there, and I stayed with this gentleman for about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks or a month. Then the sheriff came by, he and his wife came by and picked me up in a buggy and took me over to the train station. I went into Paris, and I got in with a bunch of boys. They took me to, I think there's about 4 of them. They were selling ration coupons. So I stayed with them, and I really had a good time there. I went to prize fights, and we had meals you wouldn't believe. Of course, they were selling ration coupons, and I really was living well, France. And I believe there was 3 boys and a girl, and we were staying at this laundry. And we'd go down in Paris, but the boys wouldn't walk with me. I had to go with this girl. She and I went to shows, and they'd always walk behind me in front of me. They'd never walk with me. You can imagine why.
Yeah.
And then after staying there for a while, then I got on the train and went to Plua, and we were picked up by the British.
Both.
British pulled PT boat, kind of a PT boat, is MG 503, I believe, in there and picked us up one night.
Okay, now, how did you get out to the boat? They just.
Oh, we
at
went
night
down.
and-
Oh yeah, it's black dark. We went through a minefield, and I think there were probably about 28 of us left. And we went through this minefield and down this steep slope. We would have never tried it in the daytime. We had to stand on each other's shoulder, put our feet on the next person's shoulder so we could get down there to the bay. And we was waiting around that water, and it's icy cold, I'm telling you. And they came in on little pirogues kind of and picked us up. And I think the boat should have held about 4 people, and I think we had about 8 or 10 in there. And I was sitting in the tail end of the thing, and finally we got out to this PT boat, this MG 503, and all of a sudden you can see the silhouette is real dark, and the ones on the left started reaching for the rope ladder, and it almost capsized. I was trying to get over on the other side to keep it from it, and I had an overcoat on. But anyway, we got up in this PT boat, and I know years later I was talking to Bill Webb. He was one that came in and got us. And they put me on top of a big diesel in a box. I had a box sitting on a big diesel, and I just barely could get in there. And he'd start those engines, and it'd run for about a minute, and then he'd cut it off. It'd rock and rock, and then start up and run about a minute, and rock and rock. And that must have gone on for 2 hours. And finally, all of a sudden, boy, it felt like that thing came out of the water. They opened up those twin diesels, and that thing just stood on its end. And they came down and said, well, you can come out now. And I came outside, and of course, we were headed for England. And I asked Bill Webb, I said, Bill, what happened that night? Why did he keep messing around? He said, Sweatt, if you could have seen where we were going, he said, we couldn't run those motors but just about a minute at a time. If we did, the Germans would pick us up. So that's why it took us so long to get out.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I went to England and went back to the base, and then came back to the United States.
In Tampa, I got to know Billy Webb really well.
Oh, you knew Webb then? Oh yeah.
So
Well,
when you mentioned Billy Webb, everybody here loves Billy. Can't help but love that guy.
oh, Billy came to see me. He stayed about 3 weeks with me, and he was fascinated with riding horses. I have a little ranch in Texas, and boy, he really loved to ride horses.
Amen. Anything we want to add about the helpers or the?
Well, I have the highest regard for the French helpers. Boy, well, that's the only reason I'm here, because I know this Maurice, he told me that I think I had pneumonia, and he got on a bicycle that night after I went to bed, he said, and he went to the doctor and told him that his mother had pneumonia. And he got some medicine for me. That's the only time. I didn't see a doctor at all. But I had flak in my chest and quite a few bullet holes in me. Every time I take a test x-ray now, or lung x-ray, you know, well, they look at it and there's two big pieces of flak about a centimeter from my lungs, about the size of your fingernail. Still in there, you can just see them.
You can go through the airport terminals and
Well, I don't know what it would do, but you can sure see them.
Well, Bob, did you write a book?
No, I haven't.
You haven't written a book?
No,
You ought to.
I guess I should, because of course, I left out a lot, you know. I mean, I went down where I went down. Have you ever heard of the William the Conqueror Tower? I went down about 2 miles from William the Conqueror. The tower was in France, I think, in 1060 or something. And the Germans, they were using that as an observation post. They saw me come down from that place. And again, when I pulled my ripcord, I had a watch on. And when I reached up to pull my ripcord, the watch hung on my helmet, and it fell from whatever, I guess I pulled my ripcord around 17,000. And about a week later, the French brought it back to me. I still have it. It's still running. Fell from that distance.
Anything else you want to add?
Well, only thing, I still, as I say, I have the highest regard for the French people.
You know, even today, the French are giving us, we're giving us a little bit of flack, but I can't feel bad about them.
Well, I think it's their government. It's not their people. The people is who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Of course, the government, I think they've done us terrible, but the French people, boy, I've thought many times that if the situation were reversed, would I have the guts to do what those people did? If my family they'd have killed all of them if they'd have caught me there. The whole family.
That's right.
And
That's why we'll never forget.
that's right.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
We're speaking now with Bob Davey. He's from Indianola, Iowa. And in World War II, he was a gunner on a B-17. If this is a B-17, a Flying Fortress, where would your position be, Bob?
Right here, where this
Hail gun.
little glassed-in area, that was big enough for my head.
How much did you weigh then?
160 pounds.
Wow. Well, tell us about it.
Well, I won't bore you with all the details of basic training and all that. Most everyone in the service goes through basically the same training to prepare them to be taken from civilian life and put into military life. So that part isn't unusual or very interesting. I guess the only thing I'd say about it is it was quite a change to be a 18-year-old farm kid and go from a relatively quiet life into all that came after Pearl Harbor. I hadn't been away from home, basically, except to the state fair once, and I went to college, and the college was about 40 miles away from my home, so I really was pretty much a sheltered kid. Worked on the farm and went through high school and so forth. Anyway, at that time, I had finished year college, and every one of my friends were in the service, that age group. And I felt like I wanted to be where everyone else was.
it wasn't much fun to stay at home and be looked at as someone who did not participate. I guess that's a nice way to say it. At any rate, I went in the Army. About the second day after I had all my shots and uniform and learned how to stand and walk and all those things, someone from the Army Air Corps came and asked if I would like to volunteer, and along with several other young men in the Army, if I would like to volunteer for flight training. And boy, that sounded pretty glamorous to me. I thought, sure, I'd like to do that. I'd like to fly an airplane and wear those wings and so forth. So, long story short, I did that. Ended up in a gunnery school in Las Vegas, Nevada. We were there, I think, roughly 6 to 8 weeks. Learned to fire all sorts of machine guns and things of that nature, handheld as well as mounted on a moving trolley car. Learned to fire, learned how to lead a target so that the rounds would hit the target rather than be way behind them. Kind of like shooting ducks, if you know what I mean. From there, I went to overseas training in Tampa, Florida. Fired from airplanes, fired at targets in the ocean, floating. Fired at targets that were pulled by a light aircraft like a Piper Cub, and we fired at a moving target that they were pulling behind the light airplane. Passed everything I needed to be asked to go overseas with a combat crew. We were issued, I guess that's the correct word, along with our overseas equipment, clothing and sleeping bag and a .45 pistol which we carried. We were issued a new airplane, a new B-17. Beautiful thing. Flew overseas, took the northern route, Greenland, Iceland, Valley Wales, down to Marrakech, North Africa, up to Tunis, and finally up to Italy, as I was assigned to the 97th Bomb Group in the 15th Air Force. This was about the first week in December of 1944. And to be perfectly honest, at that point in the war, our Air Force had performed so well that Hitler's supply of petrol, fuel for his trucks and airplanes and almost everything that they used, that supply of fuel had been cut dramatically. And the final blow, as far as their war effort was concerned, was when our Air Force knocked out the Ploesti oil fields in Romania. And I understood from not high up reliable statistics or anything like that, but I understood that the Ploesti oil fields and the refineries and the storage there amounted to about 30% of the German needs to carry on the war effort. So it was really, and the thing it did, among other things, it helped our agenda terrifically, But the thing it did, as far as me personally, they were not, I say the Germans, were not able to put up fighter aircraft to shoot us down. They didn't have the fuel. And, but what they did do, they would take one of their fighter aircraft and fly along at our altitude far enough out of range that we couldn't shoot them down, and radio to the gunners on the ground our altitude, which then made their effort much more effective. They could set their charges in those anti-aircraft shells to explode at precisely our altitude, and it got pretty severe. But at any rate, are we doing all right on
We're
time?
doing fine, Bob.
Okay. Okay.
Now you're flying along on what mission and you got into trouble?
You know about that?
No, tell us about it.
First mission was to Brucks, Germany, to an oil refinery. We got, as the saying goes, the hell shot out of us. We had holes as big as a Texas cowboy hat, down to the size that you could hardly see, you know, size of lead in a lead pencil. We got home all right. We had, at nearest count, we had over 300 holes in our airplane. The hydraulic was shot out, the intercom was shot out, the oxygen was shot out. We had almost nothing, but we got it down, and due to the skill of the pilot and co-pilot, and we had one wounded gunner. That was number one. Second mission, oh, and I'll tell you that, I should tell you, after we took that new airplane over, that was the only decent airplane I flew in. And I flew 20 missions altogether. The rest of them were patched up, beat up, worn out, doggiest old planes you ever saw. But, and that's what we got the second mission. It was a real old model that, I don't know how long it had been there, but it had been in service a long time. Had lots of patches on it. It just didn't look like it would fly, and didn't. We got to within 10 minutes of dropping our bombs on Vienna, and we lost oil pressure in an engine, and it froze up, as the saying goes, and didn't turn anymore. The pilot noticed that we were losing pressure in another one. I believe it was on the same side of the aircraft. So there wasn't any question that we would not be able to go ahead, drop our bombs, and keep up with the formation. So our pilot radioed the pilot, the lead squadron, and told him we were dropping out. And we did a right turn, flew out over Hungary. Bombardier put the safety pins back in the bomb so they would not explode. We dropped those bombs. We threw out our ammunition. We threw out our gun barrels. Anything that had any significant weight to it, we threw out in an attempt to get the airplane back to Italy. We're not successful. We lost another engine, because each time you lose an engine, it puts that much more strain on the remaining engines, and they just weren't up to it. So we were down to one engine, and we were flying above I guess you call it an overcast. We were above it, but it was a solid bank of white fluffy clouds with no holes to see through or to fly down through. And that's kind of interesting. We flew along for a while and became lost because the navigator had to leave his charts and so forth. At any rate, we were flying along, and the pilot said, "Okay, guys, bail out." Well, the co-pilot spoke up and said, "No, no, no, wait a minute." So we waited, probably less than 5 minutes. And again, the pilot gave the order to bail out, and we did. And years later, at a reunion we had in Colorado Springs, I asked the pilot, why did you do this? Why did we not bail out the first time and then all of a sudden it was a go? He said, well, I looked up ahead and we were losing altitude, couldn't hold the plane up and maintain altitude. He said, I looked up ahead and I saw a mountain peak sticking up through the clouds. So he said there wasn't any question about it. I didn't want to go down through the clouds, didn't want to risk that, so it was time to jump. So we did. And we landed in, well, it was, I guess, Bosnia. I'm not real sure of the boundaries of Bosnia and Serbia, but in that general area, and a place you'd recognize the town of Tuzla. The second day we walked into Tuzla, and we were helped by Tito's partisans. They guided us through the mountains. They saw that we had a safe place to stay all night. Might be a barn full of hay to sleep in, but neighbor ladies, for instance, more than once, cooked breakfast for us the next morning, and those people, they saved our lives.
Yeah.
We had gone through territory that I found out later, while Tuzla, for instance, the next day after we left, it fell into German hands. So they were all around us.
They told you what to do, where to go, how
Yes.
to do it, what to dress,
Yes.
all that stuff,
Yes,
and you did it.
yeah.
Well, how long were you evading?
We bailed out the 15th of January, 1945, and we arrived back in Italy the 25th of January. So it was basically 10 days.
You're lucky.
Oh,
You're lucky to make it. You're lucky to do it. You had
Yeah.
good help.
yeah.
Anything you want to add, Bob? I think that's a very interesting story. Remember any helpers' names?
That's the thing I feel so bad about, that I didn't ask them their names. At that time, you know, we were more worried about having something to eat, being able to walk and keep up with these young men that were guiding us, and thinking that, well, you know, we could get picked off by a sniper, or, you know, who knows?
Well, there's another good reason not to get their names, because if you ever kept held or captured, you didn't know anything.
That's right. That's exactly right. But how I would like to be able to say thank you.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you have. They don't know it yet. Maybe they know it, but you just did. One last question, if I can remember what it was. You know, along in years, aren't we?
Yes.
When it comes to the helpers, what more can we do to them except say thank you? They put their lives on their line for you.
That's right. That's right. I don't know. I don't know. You know, if I knew that someone that helped me needed something that I could provide, why, you know, I'd do it in a minute if it's something within my power.
Yeah.
Because I owe them everything.
That's a feeling of love, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, Davey, thank you so much.
Thank you, Fred.